Welcome to Market Buzz. I'm Greg Schnell, the host of the Market Buzz. Each show, we do a deep dive into different industry groups using weekly charts on a long timeline. Please follow me on social media at Schnell Investor, on Twitter for timely insights. You can also find blog articles on StockCharts.com as well as OspreyStrategic.org. So with that, I'd like to start off highlighting agriculture this week. The market has pulled back a bit, so we'll cover off a little bit of that, but I do want to highlight the agriculture charts because they do seem to be behaving a little bit better. So this week the market has rolled over, obviously. I want to show you some trends on the big six and how I read those, and then try and show a little bit more about that as we move into agriculture and kind of use the balance between what I'm seeing on a chart typically, what's showing up right now, and why I think we're at an important inflection point. And so if you like the way we look at the markets, you're more than welcome to go check out things at OspreyStrategic.org. You can always try a 1-month membership at $7. It does take a few cycles to see how the market rolls over and how that works. But I'd encourage you to at least stay on board for a few months to see how one or two of those cycles play out as we try to protect our capital. And these are the types of things that you'll find there. Again, the daily setups are pretty well done by Dwight Galusha. I think you'll find them. I get emails and texts from people who have said they've had stunning results doing that. Somebody had moved up their tax-free savings account over 7-fold last year. So anyway, hopefully you'll find some interesting stuff there. I'm going to go over to the markets here and just show you a little bit about. I'm recording this after Tuesday night, so after Tuesday's market. What we see here is we were flat pretty much on Tuesday, but it was Monday that was the big drubbing where the markets fell relatively hard. And I think what we want to be aware of on these daily charts, again, all of them stalled at the 200-day moving average. I've been talking about that for a while, but they meaningfully fell hard. Not sure what this volume profile is about. That doesn't seem quite right. Anyway, 2 days of volume taking up 25 billion. Anyway, the issue is we were supported by the 40-week moving average, and now we're finding that as resistance. Still early. You can see the full stochastic on the weekly hasn't really rolled over yet, but the PPO is at an important inflection point just below zero. As I mentioned, I want to cover off some of the big stocks, but I thought this was an interesting list. This is the third column here is the year-to-date performance, and it's sorted on that row or column. And what you can see here is whatever out of the 100 stocks in the NASDAQ, these are the ones that are still positive. So Vertex Pharmaceuticals continues to be in an uptrend. T-Mobile, same thing. American Electric Power, it's been a bit of a jerky ride. Dollar Tree, it's been working its way higher. XL Energy, wild ride. All of the energy has been a wild ride. Last week's show was on the energy sector and discussing specifically how hard it was to be in the energy group because it just keeps swinging wildly week to week. Exelon Corp, really, I would just say it's kind of it was a big uptrend and it broke, and now it looks like it's trying to get back up there. I'd be more concerned actually about staying in that one. AMZN's doing okay, hasn't really gone anywhere for the last 4 or 5 months. Kraft Heinz flat. So it kind of had a big push in April, and really other than that, it hasn't been a whole bunch to talk about. C-Trip trying to make a bottom here and finally go higher. So that one might be one of the few that was in a downtrend, actually trying to make a bigger picture change. Keurig Dr. Pepper, chart went straight up since June, so that one's a pretty interesting one. CGen looks like it's rolling over to me. Automatic data processing, again, all of the gains in a couple of weeks there, so you can't really use that one as a sort of a long-term investing strategy. Here's Checkpoint Software breaking down lower, so not really. I'm actually surprised it's up on the year, but you can see it had a really good run January to March and then basically fell apart. PepsiCo pushed up to new highs, so that's good. PACCAR, truck equipment is interesting here because one of the things that I'm worried about is if the economy is going to slow, usually PACCAR would be one of the companies that should show that. So the big surge we had in July off the July lows to back to prior highs looks pretty bullish to me. Now, if it's just going to roll back over and double top, there's nothing there. But that would be an interesting one to watch and see if it can break out. Again, if there's demand for trucks, then that chart should do pretty well. Sirius XM satellite, who would have thought that was one of the top 20 stocks here. Fiserv, that downtrend looks broken to me, and it's been a nice rally off the lows. Maybe on this next pullback, it'll be an interesting place to look at it again. O'Reilly Automotive, second last one, double topping right now. We'll see if it's got the ability to push through to new highs, and same with Paychex, double topping. So anyway, that wraps up all the stocks that are positive on the year. So kind of a bit of a dismal outlook, but I think the bigger thing we want to be aware of here is that, as the market tries to find its footing, can some of these big names go forward? The reason I mentioned I wanted to talk about the FANG names specifically is something is showing up on the charts as we speak on a few of them, and I think it's a timely thing to look at. So what you can see here with Apple is Apple had been running up nicely, and now it's making a series of kind of lower highs, and this is the first time its PPO has gone below zero before, and now it's run up here. It's briefly just above zero. If this was to die right here, this is an important inflection point on the way I look at the market. So what I'm talking about is this trend line right here, and this is our first dip below zero. Usually to me that's a warning shot, and the last rally pushes up above zero, and then or pushes up near zero and then rolls down hard. But once it's gone below zero, that's an important place to watch for an inflection. So we're sitting here at that location, much like we did back in 2019, went below zero, came back up, and then it caught itself and went higher. So the real question here, if Apple rolls over, are we going to have a big negative, or does it actually turn and break higher? And with that, that would be a more bullish positioning for me. So you can see it finally started to break through its trend line there. This negative loop here that it dropped down into is a pretty, it's one of the signals that I like to watch for on a weekly chart, just to see if things are breaking. When we look at the Amazon chart, I have all these set up for quarterly. I'm just going to jump on the weeklies. What you see here, this is a good sign for me for Amazon. This has been downtrending for almost 2 years, and we're starting to break that. So what I'd like to see is it come up, pull back down, and then go higher. If I was to design it out, that's how I would expect that to work. So I'm looking forward to Amazon kind of getting its mojo back and starting to work its way higher. Next chart I want to talk about is Alphabet. And on Alphabet here, you can see we dipped here, and what we've got is a downsloping trend line that's trying to break. And so that is very positive. What I'm worried about is that this wants to roll over below zero. And a rollover below zero can be particularly fast to the downside. So that chart is definitely worth watching. If all of a sudden this wants to start breaking down here, this could move down meaningfully. Looking in on Meta platforms here. So what we can see on this chart is, notice the PPO has no real momentum. It's sitting down here at the bottom. It just can't get going positive. It's right at a juncture for me that if this could start to break out to new highs here, or start to change the direction of the chart, I'd be more interested, just because it's been declining for a year, and if it can finally turn and get some investors interested, that might be a relatively nice place to be, and this might be an example of where it was once before, where this trend line broke. And once that started to cook, that was really good. So a lot of these charts are at interesting inflection points, both positive and negative. Again, Amazon looks to me like it's ready to break out to the upside, but then you get a chart like this and it's just dead. So does it have any power to turn up here, or does this start to continue to make lower lows? I really am interested to watch and see how the next couple of weeks perform. That's what I wanted. Here we go for Microsoft. And Microsoft has made this big loop down. And again, I do not want to see this roll over below zero. That's a pretty bearish sign for me. And if you look at Microsoft, I've got quite a bit of information on the chart here, but what I want to show is this green line. Maybe I should make it black just so it's a little easier to see. Black break down there. It was support all the way through the last 5 years. And then what we've got now is it could end up being resistance and roll down. So this is quite an important inflection point. Yes, we've had a little short downtrend here, but what I want to watch for is the bigger trend. And if all of a sudden, let's just say that it starts to build a trend line down here and rolls on over under zero, to me, that's an extremely cautionary place for us, and for one of the big main stocks, that's a pretty important point to watch. Nvidia reports on Wednesday, so this is going to be closely watched to see if the semiconductor industry can start to get going again. What we want to watch for here is we've got that downtrend line. I want to make sure we don't end up with this sort of a downtrend line where Nvidia rolls over below zero, and that marks a substantial decline. And if that's going to happen, then we're going to end up having this situation. So watch closely to just see how Nvidia reports. It's trying to break higher, and that would be very bullish. Obviously, that would be making a higher low in momentum, and that's the kind of signal we'd like to see. We haven't got it yet, so we'll find out if earnings is one of those things that actually changes the chart for us. And lastly is Tesla. And the reason I'm thinking hard about Tesla here, I heard a really interesting podcast about an investor that had made quite a bit of money on options in Tesla. One of the traits he likes about it is that some people are so bearish, and maybe I'm one of those people, that the chart usually surprises to the upside, and so for options it actually makes a larger than normal move, or larger than the options market is anticipating, because the people who are short have to cover. So anyway, I thought it was interesting, but to me the chart is still trending down, and we're right at the inflection point here to see, first of all, the PPO has turned up. Does it have the energy to get back through this downtrend, which is almost 2 full years old here? Downtrend in momentum. Price really hasn't done anything. It was $900 a year and a half ago. It's $900 now. So it's been a sideways stock, but I just thought it was so interesting how somebody else looked at that sort of idea. Anyway, for me, if this rolls down here, again, this is like Apple going below zero, trying to rally up, and if it fails, that's a pretty big deal. So we have that situation on Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft, or sorry, not Amazon, Apple, Tesla, and Microsoft. Watching very closely just to see how these three big companies get received here in the short term. And if these charts start to roll over, I want to be a lot more cautious on the setup than I would otherwise be, because again, typically their direction determines a lot of the direction of the overall market. So with that, I want to switch it over and I want to go into a few food companies, and some of these are from the MOO ETF. And then the other part of it that I'd like to discuss is just some of the charts are actually performing pretty well. Like you can see this Archer Daniels Midland. Here was the price at the beginning of the year, and it's quite a bit higher than that now. So let's say $20 higher. I like it, and the reason I like it is because this chart is trending higher. Let's just take off the auto size here. Then that'll allow me to annotate. But this uptrend briefly got broke, but this uptrend here is still in play. And if this chart can work higher, that's a pretty significant one. Right now, remember how it got down to zero, so that tells me to watch. If this rolls over right here, this could be a final high. that would be an important inflection point for me. Or if it can keep extending, obviously I want to be interested. Now, there's a dramatic food shortage coming this winter, both because of the cost of energy to build things out, or to grow things is really prohibiting fertilizer manufacturing. So one example I heard was Sri Lanka had stopped using fertilizer and they were going to go organic and green or whatever, mostly because they couldn't afford fertilizer. But what it did was it cut their crop production by 30% in a single year. So if you can't get fertilizer, or if fertilizer is so expensive, then it's going to make it very hard for the products that they sell to be profitable. So you're in a real pickle. Either the cost of the goods that you're making, in this case grains or whatever, has to soar to keep up with the rising cost of fertilizer and the cost of fuel and equipment on the farm. So all of these things are a big deal. On this AGCO chart, just to annotate this one, I want to use that same logic on the PPO. And what you see here, dip below zero, runs up, makes its kind of final high, and then falls away here. And now we're making lower highs, lower lows, going below zero. As long as this trend line down is in play, I don't want to touch this stock. I want to make sure I stay away from it and wait for that breakout, because that would tell me that something is changing, the opportunity or the negative momentum trend is finally ending. I'm going to go down here to Bunge. And on Bunge, you'll notice stock price going higher, but momentum has now just tagged below zero here. So fertilizer's a big space, and again, where they're manufacturing it and the cost of the natural gas that they would normally use to create fertilizer is pretty important. I can draw a downtrend line here. It's obviously way higher. But what I want to make sure is if this just dips and turns up and then turns down again right away, I want to be very, very cautious, even though it's in the ag space with all of the issues coming at it. Our PPO, our price action is right at the 200-day or 40-week moving average. And if this was to start failing right here, that would be a big deal. The reason I might expect it to is because of this negative PPO. They've allowed it to cycle low. It'll have some sort of a bounce. But the real question is how much of a bounce. And what you notice on this chart here is on the left-hand side, the PPO stays below zero for the most part. And look what happens to the trend. Here you're in an uptrend, even though the PPO is now starting to make lower highs in momentum and lower lows. Now that we're below zero, we really have to watch and make sure that this chart doesn't break down. So this is a really classic example of what we're looking for in the indicators just to help us with the sentiment in the market. So I've laid it out in Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, just to show how important that trend line will be. What I want to show is when things start to stay negative, then you end up with a result like this. So I'm not trying to say I'm bullish or bearish on it. I just want to read what the information coming at me is telling me. And what it's sharing with me is we're right at that inflection point on those three big companies, especially to make sure and watch them, because if they do start to break down, that will be meaningful. Now, we all remember Beyond Meat, and it's definitely Beyond Meat, because look at this thing. It is just terrible. Up around 170, now under 30. And even while the market was rising for the last 2 weeks roughly, we rolled over last week with a little bit of a pull down on the indexes. This went from 44 to 30 in a couple of weeks. It's now down to 26. So this thing almost in half. In $22 would be half. So you're almost there in 2 weeks. Like, there's really no support for this stock on a buying place. And then when I look at this PPO, you can see we have a big downtrend here. It's trying to make a higher low. So let's just say it does that. Well, then finally you might have a buyer interested in showing up on this stock that's going to make the base when we start to turn higher. But the PPO could just live below zero and this thing's not going anywhere. So we want to be very aware of it, like Bunge was. Okay, here's ConAgra Brands. This stock's done nothing for 5 years. Like, why even own it? You got money at risk and yet you're not making anything. CF Industries, really nice uptrend here. I like this. So when I look at this, I get pretty excited because everything is in gear to the upside. Now, I haven't shown you the PPO on purpose, but when we slide it up, what we see about the PPO, it's just trying to bounce off zero again and turn higher. That to me looks like a continuation of the trend. And this chart looks pretty good. Now, Bunge is in the same business as CF. So having that Bunge chart being so different is pretty important. And then the other thing that we can do for an annotation here is just slide this all the way across. And you can see when it finally broke that long trend, that was time to get on board, and then we were up and away. So hopefully that gives you an idea of just some of the things I like to look at and why I like to look at them. When these long trends and momentum are starting to change, it's a good place to at least be aware. And if you have the courage to ride through all these cycles, that's cool. Again, so far everything is positive on this chart, and I'd like to stay with that. Deere reported last week, but it's holding its uptrend really, really well. And what I like on this particular chart is that the big downtrend is sitting here. We've gone below zero, so now we're same like Apple and Microsoft. We want to know if it's going to come up, hit this line and turn back down, or if we're actually going to be able to turn higher and start a new uptrend. And so that's the big question. Again, so here's another chart giving us a clue that the next few weeks is important in terms of that, and especially being below zero, right? That's the reason that this one's so different. FMC, this chart really hasn't made any money for 2 years, so I don't really want to spend a whole bunch of time worrying about it. MFI, this is a Canadian food processor. Chart's breaking down. Is there any reason to want it? And you can just see once it starts to really go below zero and continue below zero, trying to get above its signal line and failing, it's a pretty hard place to own, and the chart's really got big gaps on it, so it looks like the earnings aren't kind of consistent enough to keep investors interested. Here's the actual MOO agricultural ETF, and again, there's that trend line that we want to watch for. Your momentum has been declining. PPO rated zero. Does this turn higher or lower? I want to make sure it goes higher, and if it doesn't, then this whole ag area might be another problem for us. Now here's Mosaic, again in the same business as CF Industries. PPO's trying to turn up right around zero. That looks pretty good, so I like that. Here's Nutrien. This chart just recently started to turn everything up. It's got a PPO cross right at zero, very bullish. So everything looks on board to stay in this, and again, they make fertilizer. And they also own potash, which is a big important fertilizer component. So all of these charts are showing us something different. Here's Pilgrims Pride, but when I look at the PPO, a lot of these charts are giving me signals of where to stay invested and where to get away from, and some of them are at the point where we're about to find out in the next 2 weeks if it's really something we want to get back into or if we should just stay away. So it should be important days heading into the early part of September. SQM, this thing is a volatile ride. This was literally a 23% drop in a week on the charts. As it goes up, makes a new high above the prior high, and then breaks down 23% literally in just a few days. So very, very volatile. I will say there's an uptrend in play here on the momentum, but we just tried to get above our signal line and failed. That makes me a lot more leery about it. But when I look at the big picture, again, going all the way back 2 years ago, we've got a rising tide here on our momentum indicator. Price is working up in the top corner. If you can live with the volatility, the chart continues to work. But we do have a place here where the PPO is declining while price was trying to make a higher high. So this is a bit of a negative divergence and something we'd want to be careful of. Okay. Whatever, Tyson Foods, you can tell it's been in a downtrend for 6 months here. PPO is going below zero, so we'd like to avoid that. Here's a company, and I'm interested in this one because a friend of mine told me about it and got into it, and it was based on whatever, the same sort of Beyond Meat type of thing, veggie foods and that kind of stuff. Anyway, the chart came out. The investor was very excited to own it, and I said, well, the chart's starting to break down. and you might want to consider letting it go. And it was like, no, I really like the idea. I think it'll be fine. Well, that was at $9.50. It's at 22 cents. And that's the problem with staying with a food idea or an idea and the chart's telling you to leave. So I want to make it very clear that what we try to recommend doing is not get so... We like to invest in themes, but we want to make sure the themes are working, and when the chart changes, we want to make sure we're taking that change with it. So with that, thanks for taking the time to join me. Market Buzz airs Wednesday mornings at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on StockCharts TV, and you can also find the recordings by searching for Market Buzz and Greg Schnell on the YouTube homepage. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.